It was supposed to be an ordinary summer evening for Daniel Cross. The air was hot, heavy, and buzzing with the sound of crickets. He came home tired from work, dreaming of nothing more than a cold drink and the comfort of his family. But the moment he walked through the front door, something felt wrong. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No hum of the refrigerator, no faint buzz of the ceiling fan, no glow from the lamp in the corner. Only silence and darkness. Confused, Daniel checked the switches one by one. Click. Nothing. Click. Nothing again. Outside, he glanced at his neighbors' homes, every window alive with golden light, TVs flickering, children laughing. His house, the only one swallowed in black. Then he spotted it, a bold, red-stamped notice stuffed in his mailbox. HOA, power cut due to violation. Daniel's jaw tightened as he read the words. His family's electricity had been shut off, not by the city, not by the power company, but by the very HOA he paid thousands of dollars to every year-end. What the HOA didn't know was that the man they had just tried to leave powerless was the very man who held the keys to the entire town's power grid. Daniel Cross wasn't the kind of man who lived for drama. He had moved his family to Oak Ridge Estates for one reason: peace, a quiet neighborhood, tree-lined streets, and a safe place where his kids could grow without worry. At first, it seemed perfect. The houses looked the same, the lawns were trimmed like carpets, and neighbors smiled as they passed by. But beneath those smiles lay something else. The HOA board, strict, nosy, and always watching. It started small. One morning, Daniel found a yellow slip taped to his garage door: violation, trash can left visible after 9 a.m. He paid the fine and thought nothing of it. A week later, another notice arrived: violation, grass exceeded 2 inches. Daniel laughed, grabbed his mower, and handled it immediately. But the notices kept coming like clockwork. His kids left their bikes near the porch. Fine, his wife planted tulips instead of roses. Fine, even his old pickup truck, parked in his own driveway, was called an eyesore. Every detail of his life measured and punished by people with clipboards and too much free time. At first, Daniel swallowed his frustration. Play by their rules, he thought, and it'll be easier in the long run. But deep down, a storm was building, because no matter how perfectly he followed the rules, the HOA always seemed to find something new. Then, on one particularly hot week, the fines piled higher than ever. But what Daniel didn't realize was that the board was about to take things from irritating to unforgivable. It was the middle of July when the first blackout hit Daniel's home. The sun was still high, the heat unbearable, and suddenly the air conditioning clicked off, the fridge hummed into silence, the lights died, and his children ran into the living room. Confused and scared, Daniel rushed outside only to see a smug figure standing by the power meter: Karen Holt, the head of the HOA board, clipboard in hand, with 2 other members standing behind her like bodyguards. Karen's voice was cold, sharp. "Mr. Cross, you've violated community standards too many times. We're cutting off your power until further notice." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "You can't do this. This isn't even legal." But Karen just smirked, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "Read the bylaws, Daniel. We control utilities in this neighborhood, and maybe, just maybe, if you learn to follow the rules, we'll consider turning it back on." That night was unbearable. His wife fanned the children with an old magazine, trying to keep them cool as sweat rolled down their faces. The food in the fridge spoiled, milk turning sour, meat going bad. Meanwhile, across the street, every house glowed bright, laughter spilling into the warm night air. The next day, Daniel pleaded with the board, but they refused. Another night of darkness came, and this time, neighbors whispered, smirked, even mocked him. "Should have followed the rules," one man muttered as Daniel passed by. "Maybe he'll learn his lesson." Another woman whispered loudly enough for his kids to hear, but Daniel didn't break. No, each night in the dark only hardened his resolve. Because what the HOA didn't realize was that they hadn't just picked a fight with a homeowner, they had picked a fight with the very man who built the foundation of their power itself. The third night without power was the worst. The air inside Daniel's home felt thick, like a blanket of heat pressing down on his family. His youngest daughter lay on the couch, her face red, her breathing shallow from the suffocating air. His wife whispered, "Daniel, we can't go on like this." Her voice cracked, not from anger, but from worry from desperation. Daniel looked at her, then at his children, and something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about rules anymore. This was about dignity, about survival, about a line the HOA had no right to cross that night. Long after his family drifted into uneasy sleep, Daniel sat in his dark kitchen. With a single flashlight on the table, he pulled out a dusty file box from the cabinet. Something he hadn't touched in years. Inside were papers, old contracts, diagrams, and maps, documents from his career as an electrical engineer. Daniel had once worked for the regional energy company, helping to design the very grid that powered their town, and buried among those papers was something the HOA board had no clue about years ago. When the utility company expanded, Daniel had bought into a small ownership stake of the substation that fed electricity into Oak Ridge Estates. It was just a technical investment at the time. Paperwork he barely thought about, but in reality, it gave him a unique position. Daniel Cross wasn't just a homeowner living under the HOA's thumb. He was, in legal terms, a part owner of the very power that flowed through every wire, every outlet, every street lamp in the neighborhood. As Daniel flipped through those pages, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. For the first time in days, the HOA thought they could control him by cutting his power, but what they didn't realize was this: the power grid was his. This morning, Daniel drove quietly into town, straight to the office of the utility company. The receptionist recognized him instantly, and within minutes he was seated with the regional manager, an old colleague who greeted him warmly. Daniel Cross? Now that's a name I haven't heard in years. What brings you in? Daniel placed the HOA's red stamp notice on the desk. They think they can cut my power, he said slowly. The manager frowned, scanning the document, then laughed, short, sharp, disbelieving. They can't do that, Daniel. They don't own the lines we do, or rather you do too. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. You still own that 25% stake in the Oak Ridge substation. Don't tell me they forgot who they're dealing with. Daniel's expression hardened. They didn't forget. They never knew. The manager tapped the notice on the desk, then looked Daniel straight in the eye. You know what this means, right? If they want to play this game, you can flip the switch on them instead. And in that moment, Daniel realized the storm had shifted. The HOA thought they had stripped him of power, but now Daniel held the ultimate card in his hand. The question was, how far was he willing to go to remind them who really kept the lights on in Oak Ridge Estates? Daniel didn't rush home that afternoon. Instead, he parked his truck just outside the Oak Ridge Community Center, where the HOA board gathered every Thursday evening. From outside the window, he could see them, 5 board members sitting at a polished oak table, laughing, drinking bottled water, their smug faces lit by bright fluorescent lights. Inside that room, they were kings and queens, handing down judgment to every resident as if they owned them. But Daniel knew something they didn't, that their crowns were made of glass. And, glass shatters easily. He walked inside, each step deliberate. The faint hum of the building's central air, mocking the heat and darkness. Waiting at his own home, the board looked up. Surprised, Karen Holt's lips curled into a grin. Well. Mr. Cross, come to beg for your power back? The room chuckled softly, the other members exchanging glances of amusement. Daniel stood tall, shoulders squared, his eyes locked on Karen's. No, he said calmly. I came to give you a warning. The chuckles stopped. Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying the performance. A warning? From a man sitting in the dark while the rest of us enjoy our lights? She leaned forward, elbows on the table. Go on then. Entertain us. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a thick folder of papers, contracts, utility agreements, ownership records, all neatly stacked and stamped. He laid them flat on the table, his hand pressing down hard enough for the wood to creak. You cut my power, Daniel said, his voice low but clear. But what you didn't realize is the power running through this neighborhood, it's mine. The room went silent for a long moment. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the air. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, whispering, What does he mean? Karen forced a laugh, but her smile wavered. You're bluffing, she snapped. No homeowner controls utilities. Daniel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Check the documents. I own 25% of the Oak Ridge substation. That means Every watt of electricity that passes through your homes passes through me first. And he pointed at Karen, you just declared war on your own supplier. The board members' faces drained of color, the laughter was gone, replaced with confusion, fear, and something Karen had never shown before. Karen tried to recover, slamming her palm on the table. This doesn't change anything we have? Rules? And you've broken them? Daniel smiled for the first time in days. A cold, sharp smile. You're right. This changes nothing for me, but for you, for this neighborhood. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper that cut sharper than a shout. It changes everything. And with that, Daniel turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind silence heavier than any blackout the HO thought they had backed him into a corner. But now the lights above their heads suddenly didn't feel so safe anymore. HO thought they had Daniel cornered. They believed cutting off his power would force him to kneel, to beg, to finally submit to their petty rules. But what they didn't know was that the power they had shut off wasn't really theirs to control one humid evening. As the HOA board gathered for their weekly meeting, Daniel walked in carrying a folder thick with papers. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply placed the folder on the table and slid it toward Karen. Her eyes narrowed as she flipped through the documents. Utility contracts, ownership certificates, legal filings stamped with dates and signatures, proof that Daniel wasn't just a homeowner, he was part owner of the Oak Ridge power grid itself. The smug smiles vanished from the board members' faces. Karen's hand trembled as she tried to keep her voice steady. This doesn't mean you can control us. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. No, Karen, it means you don't control me. In fact, every watt of electricity flowing into this neighborhood runs through infrastructure I own, and if you think you can cut me off, maybe it's time I remind you what real control looks like. That night, the neighborhood learned what true darkness felt like. At precisely midnight, every light in Oak Ridge flickered, then died. Street lamps went out, televisions cut to black. Air conditioners sputtered and fell silent one by one. Homes plunged into the same suffocating darkness Daniel's family had endured, and then slowly, deliberately, his house lit up, bright, humming with energy, while the rest of Oak Ridge sat powerless. Neighbors spilt onto the streets in confusion, panic rising as children cried and phones lost signal, and there stood Daniel, calm on his porch, watching as the board members realized the tables had turned. Karen stormed up his driveway, rage twisting her face. You can't do this. This is illegal. But Daniel only smiled. Illegal? You were the ones who abused your power. I'm just showing you what happens when you pick a fight with the grid itself. By morning, the HOA was in chaos. Residents demanded answers, some shouting at Karen, others begging Daniel to turn the lights back on, and when the board finally tried to fight him, Daniel delivered the final blow. Lawsuits, fines, and legal action backed by his ironclad contracts. The empire Karen had built on fear crumbled in a matter of days, and Daniel? He had proven once and for all that the true power didn't lie in petty rules or HOA politics. It flowed through the wires he controlled. So I'll leave you with this question. If someone tried to strip away your freedom, would you fight back quietly, or would you remind them where the real power comes from? The blackout across Oak Ridge lasted less than a night, but its impact would last for years. By sunrise, the board had no choice but to call an emergency meeting, not to discipline Daniel, but to beg for his cooperation. Residents gathered outside the community center, whispering, pointing, and waiting for answers. Mothers fanned crying children. Old men sat on porches with flashlights, and everyone's eyes kept drifting toward one house, the only one glowing with steady light in the sea of darkness. Daniel's house. For the first time, neighbors saw the truth. The HOA wasn't protecting them, it was choking them, and the man they thought was stubborn, rebellious, even reckless, was the only one willing to stand up to the boards. Abuse. Karen tried to salvage her power. She marched out in front of the crowd, her red blazer wrinkled, her voice hoarse from shouting, "Residents of Oak Ridge, we are working on resolving the outage as quickly as possible. This is only a temporary disruption." But the crowd didn't buy it this time. Shouts rose from the people she once controlled. "Liar! You did this! Give Daniel his rights back!" The very voices that once cowered before her were now demanding her resignation. The empire she had built on intimidation cracked under the weight of a single night without power, and in that chaos, Daniel stepped forward not as a man seeking revenge, but as someone who had finally had enough. He spoke calmly, his words carrying in the tense silence, "All I ever wanted was peace, peace for my family, peace for my home, but you turned that into a battlefield. You cut my power, tried to humiliate me, tried to break me, but here's the thing about power." He glanced at the glowing street lamp flickering back to life near his driveway. "It doesn't come from a title or a rule book. It comes from knowing who you are, what you stand for, and refusing to back down." By the end of that week, Karen Holt was removed from her position. The board was restructured, policies rewritten, and for the first time in years, Oak Ridge residents had a taste of freedom again. Daniel didn't lord his victory over anyone he didn't need to. He had proven his point, and he knew he'd never be underestimated again. The HOA had tried to cut off his light, but in the end, Daniel showed them that some men don't just use power, they are power. Now I ask you this: if a system meant to serve you turned against you, would you have the courage to flip the switch back in your favor?
This was just one story, but the next one will be even more dramatic. Are you ready? Then you need to subscribe to HOA Stories 87 right now. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell because the next story might sound a little too close to home.